Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Weird. I'm going to cover an interesting subject today. This is the Oracle at Delphi. So, there's this old Greek legend that says that there was a goat herder called Keratus who was tending his flock up in the mountains, and he looked across into the distance and saw some of his goats acting in a very strange way indeed. They were jumping around and making noises that goats normally don't make. So Keratus went over to see what was going on, and when he got there, he noticed that they were all around a crack or a vent in the floor, and from it a strange gas was coming out. And when he approached it and smelt the gas himself, he was overcome, initially with euphoria and then with strange visions of the future. Now, naturally, Keratus went back to his family and his village and told everybody about it. And they all went up into the mountains to find this fault in the ground, this volcanic fault that had opened up with the strange gas coming out. And the word spread. Many people came from all over the place to find and sniff the gases coming out of this vent, and it became quite a tourist attraction. Now, one day somebody approached the vent in the ground and inhaled way too much of the gas, and in a flailing state of madness, threw themselves into the chasm and fell to their death. As a result, the locals built a wall around the fault in the ground to prevent further people from falling in. And this is pretty much where our story begins, because this wall around the vent eventually became a shrine, and it grew and grew and grew over a period of 1,000 years. And over that time, this place became known as the Oracle at Delphi. Now, the ability for these gases to induce a state where people could foretell the future was spread far and wide. So it was very soon that the small shrine that was built there grew, and it was eventually controlled by priests with a primary priestess or a Pythias who would be the primary reader at the site. Over the centuries, the oracle site at Delphi became quite a tourist attraction, and it was so important to ancient Greece that nothing could happen in politics unless the oracle had approved it first. People came from all over the known world to get a reading to find out what was going on in their future. Initially, there was only one reading per year on the 7th of February, which was the birthday of Apollo. But as the site became more and more popular, 9 readings were carried out per year. Now, these readings, you weren't guaranteed to get one when you went to Delphi, and it was the only people that were guaranteed were the ones who brought the biggest gifts to the priests on the site. Other people had to wait in line and literally draw their number out of a hat. And if they were unsuccessful, they would have to stay on the site for a whole nother month and hope that they were lucky on the next month to draw their name out and get their reading. And as a result, this site got bigger and bigger and really became a major tourist attraction with people staying there for some time. Many famous people in the ancient world visited the oracle at Delphi. Most famously, Alexander the Great, where he was declared invincible, and Socrates, who was at the oracle site, declared the wisest man of all time. Even philosophers like Plato, who questioned everything that was put to them, fervently agreed with everything that the oracle said. For the 9 months when readings were happening at the site, the god Apollo presided over it. And for the 3 months of winter, it was the god Dionysus. Now, what was happening at the oracle site? And for that, you need to look into what Dionysus was supposed to have said, and that is that mankind is 3 parts rational and 1 part mystical, and that is exactly what was going on at this place. There was a very practical reason for what was happening, and that was most of it, but there was also a very weird, mystical thing going on. I'll now explain both. Okay, so let's look at a bright, rational reason for what was going on at the Oracle site at Delphi. So, the original story from a long time ago was that there was a big crack in the ground and there was some gas coming out of it. Now, this can happen on fault lines, but in the 19th century, the French conducted extensive archaeological digs in the area and they found no evidence for any fault lines at all. And it wasn't until very recently when a oil worker who's prospecting in the area noticed that not one but two fault lines went straight through the Oracle site at Delphi. And when he went to the site, it was quite obvious exactly where they went, right through the center where the shrine was. So the original reading site, there would have been a fault there in the long distant past, probably covered up by the amount of building that had gone on the site in years since. So we know that there are faults in the area. What about the gas that was coming out of it? What was the gas? Well, analysis of the calcium carbonate rocks in the area, which are like a sponge and they hold on to gases, found that inside those rocks was huge amounts of ethylene gas. Now, ethylene used to be used as an anesthetic, and the early stages of the anesthetic effects of ethylene are euphoria, which was reported by everybody who put their head over the chasm in the old days, followed by a wild, crazy phase where people were flailing around, their arms flying everywhere, punching, jumping around. And that's the later effects of ethylene gas if you take too much of it. So, not only have we found a fault line on the site, we've also got evidence for ethylene gas, which gave all of the symptoms. But there's something else as well. It was said that the gas that came out of the ground had a sweet smell to it, and ethylene gas does have a very sweet smell to it. So we've got the faults, we've got the gas. What else was going on at the Oracle site? And I've already said that people would stay there for a month or sometimes several months before they could get a reading. And during that time, people would talk to them and they would talk to other people and certainly to the priests. And the priests would get to know what was going on in the entire region around them. You know, if a king was to come there and say, I'm thinking about going to war with my neighbor, and then the following month their neighbor came along and said, I'm thinking about going to war with this king, they would know both sides. They would probably know how many are in the army on each side and could therefore make very accurate predictions. Couple that with the fact that the person doing the reading, the young female, or in later days, the older middle-aged female who was above the vent actually doing the reading, they generally spoke in tongues, screamed and flailed around, and it was the priests who actually interpreted what was being said. Now, the answer that the priests would give would be partly accurate because they would have a really good political understanding of what was going on in the known world at the time. So any predictions they made would be reasonably accurate. But also they were very vague in the predictions that they gave. So a typical example is a certain king came there and he said, "Will I win if I go to war with these people?" And the reading was, "If you cross that river, a great nation will fall." Now, he went and crossed the river, and it was him that got wiped out and his army. So he was very angry with the oracle site, but the oracle said, You misinterpreted the reading. So it could have gone either way. So, two things. One, the site was like MI5, CIA, FBI, all rolled into one with information harvesting, with loads of priests in the area and the people staying there and all of the people that were visiting. They got to know everything that was going on in the known world. And two, they were very vague with their reading, and if they got it wrong, they could just blame the person who pitched up and say that you actually had the wrong interpretation from the accurate reading that the oracle gave. So I said that the site is, like Dionysus said, three parts rational and one part mystical. What about the weird mystical side of things? So we know there was gas coming out of a fault in the ground, and certainly in the later years, the whole site became very commercialized. I mean, they had a stadium, they had a theater, they had places for people to stay. It was a big entertainment site, and the readings were predicted accurately through information that was harvested from the people that were going there. But let's roll it back 500 or 1,000 years. I mean, it was there for 2,000 years, the site. Let's roll it right back to the beginning when the gas was coming out of the ground and that a young virgin would be there above the crack in the ground, sitting on a metal tripod, breathing in the gases and giving accurate readings of the future. What was going on there? Now, this is where it gets really weird because there are different levels of consciousness. Now, we live in a three-dimensional world, a fourth dimension of time, and way above us are other dimensions that we cannot freely walk into. In the same manner, in the fourth dimension time, you can't walk around or do anything, you can just ride the wave. The higher dimensions are even weirder. And those higher dimensions you can travel to, but you can only travel to there in higher states of consciousness. So your body can't go there, but your mind can. Now, perhaps that ethylene gas and a trance-like state that was induced, coupled with a lot of training and ritual and a lot of other stuff that was going on at that site. Perhaps in the early days, people were actually seeing visions of the future. Hey, I can hear the skeptics out there saying, yeah, it's three parts psychology and one part psychosis. But what if it's not psychosis? What if the part is truly mystical and there is some magic there to be had? There's a lot we don't know about the universe around us. Certainly, quantum physics, where that's going now, what that's opening up is turning the realms of mystery and magic into pure science. And it's as we start to understand those things that the wider population will be able to understand that there's a real miracle out there that we're missing out on. There was an inscription inside the Temple of Apollo, which every hopeful visitor will have seen before they met the Pythia, and it read, "Know thyself." You see, the answer's in you, inside all of us. It's a majesty, a divine technology, and it's inside all of us. Just like your phone cannot physically go onto the internet, your body cannot surf higher dimensions. But your phone software can go onto the internet, and in a similar way, your mind can log onto the higher unseen dimensions, especially the dimension of time. So, who today can tell us that it's all real? Reading, seeing the future. You know, if you were to ask me for my opinion, I believe in the early days of the Oracle site, people probably were seeing visions of the future. Maybe the gas coming out of the ground in the very beginning was acting as some kind of catalyst to psychologically push people into higher psychological dimensions. And in the later years, they almost certainly honed their science, their art, and became extremely good at what they were doing, not just in the political, the information harvesting, the money making, but also the mystical second side. I mean, who actually knows what went on there? I mean, short of traveling back in time and having a look for yourself, there's no real way of knowing. I guess the only thing we can do is have a little faith. So, to summarize the whole story in just a couple of minutes, there was a goat herder up in the mountains. There was a crack in the ground. His goats jumped around and went absolutely nuts. When he went over to see what was going on, he smelt the gas that the goat smelt, and he started going absolutely nuts and seeing visions of the future. Went back to his village, told his family about what was going on. They all went up there. They all told everybody, and over a period of a couple of thousand years, this site became legendary. So if I've got this right, go and find yourself some priests, learn some ritual, get some ethylene gas, and make like Nostradamus. This has been Bright Weird. I'm Steve. Thanks for watching.